Tom Bombadil was perhaps the most enigmatic being in all of Middle-earth, a creature so ancient that even the oldest elves had no memory of his origins. He called himself Eldest, claiming to have been in Middle-earth before the Dark Lord came from outside, before the first raindrop and the first acorn. Tom remembered the first raindrop and witnessed the awakening of the elves beneath the stars when Middle-earth was young. He resided in the old forest near the borders of the Shire, master of wood, water, and hill within his self-imposed boundaries. His wife Goldberry, the river daughter, shared his domain as they lived in complete harmony with nature itself. Tom's power was absolute within his realm. The One Ring, which corrupted and dominated every other being who touched it, had zero effect on him whatsoever. When Frodo offered him the ring at the Council of Elrond, Tom casually put it on his finger and remained completely visible, then made it vanish with a sleight of hand trick before giving it back with a laugh. He could see Frodo when the Hobbit wore the ring and became invisible to everyone else. The old forest itself bent to his will completely. Ancient trees that trapped and consumed travelers would release their victims at a single word from Tom. Old Man Willow, the most malevolent tree in the forest, immediately obeyed when Tom commanded it to release the hobbits. The Barrow-wights, undead spirits that haunted the Barrow Downs and served the Witch King, fled instantly when Tom sang his songs of power. He literally just walked into their tombs, sang a rhyme, and banished creatures that had terrified the region for centuries. Tom spoke in constant songs and rhymes, treating everything as a kind of cosmic joke that only he understood. His yellow boots never got muddy, his blue coat stayed bright as daylight, and nothing in Middle-earth could harm him or hold power over him. During the Council of Elrond, Gandalf explained that Tom had withdrawn from the wider world by choice, setting his own boundaries and refusing to step beyond them. The Council considered giving him the ring for safekeeping, but Gandalf warned that Tom would probably forget about it or throw it away, as he cared nothing for power or the affairs of the outside world. Tom was older than Sauron, older than the Valar's shaping of Arda, older than memory itself. Some theorists believe he was the incarnation of the secret fire, the flame of creation that Ilúvatar used to give life to the world. Others suggest he represented the music of the Ainur itself, given physical form and allowed to wander Middle-earth as a living song. But Tom himself gave no answers, only songs and riddles, content to be master of his small domain while empires rose and fell beyond his borders. Treebeard, also called Fangorn after the forest he guarded, stood as the oldest living creature in Middle-earth, who still walked beneath the sun, created by Yavanna herself after she learned that the dwarves would cut down her beloved trees. Treebeard and his fellow Ents were shepherds of the forest, given life to protect the growing things that could not protect themselves. He remembered the world before the sun and moon, when only stars lit the sky. He had walked in the woods of Beleriand before their destruction, conversed with elves before humans awakened, and watched the first acorn grow into the first oak. At 14 feet tall, Treebeard resembled a fusion of tree and man, with bark-like skin, a beard that looked like twisting roots, and deep eyes that held the memory of uncounted ages. His strength was immense, able to crack stone like eggshells between his fingers and tear apart the impregnable walls of Isengard with his bare hands. When roused to true anger during the last march of the Ents, Treebeard and his kind destroyed Saruman's entire industrial complex in a single night. They shattered dams, redirected rivers, and pulled apart stone fortifications that had taken decades to build. The power of their voices alone could crack stone when they shouted in wrath. Treebeard commanded all the Horrons, the wild tree spirits that had become dark and dangerous over the long years. Under his direction, an entire forest of Horrons marched to Helm's Deep and annihilated 10,000 orcs in the darkness, leaving no trace except piles of bones. He possessed the old magic of growing things, able to create the Ent-drafts that caused Merry and Pippin to grow taller than any hobbits in history. His knowledge spanned 3 ages of the world and included languages that had been dead for millennia. Treebeard spoke Old Entish, a language so complex and nuanced that saying his real name would take hours, as it contained the entire history of every place he had stood and everything he had seen. He was the last of the 3 eldest Entish, with Finglas having become Tree-ish and Fladrif having hidden himself away after orcs killed his beloved Rowan trees. The Entiwives had vanished long ago, leaving the Ents unable to have children and dooming their race to slow extinction. Yet Treebeard endured, patient as the mountains, slow to anger but terrible when roused, a living monument to the power of the natural world when it finally decided to fight back. Durin's Bane was the last known survivor of the Balrogs, the most terrible servants of Morgoth who had survived the War of Wrath and the breaking of Beleriand. This Balrog had fled the destruction of Morgoth's fortress of Angband and hidden itself deep beneath the misty mountains, burrowing into the roots of the world where even the light of the stars could not reach. For over 5,000 years it slept in the bottomless darkness until the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, in their endless quest for Mithril, delved too greedily and too deep in the year 1980 of the Third Age. The Balrog awakened in fury and within a year had slain King Durin VI and his son Nine I, driving the dwarves from their greatest city and earning the name Durin's Bane. As a Maya spirit corrupted by Morgoth in the Years of the Trees, the Balrog possessed power beyond mortal comprehension. Its body was wreathed in shadow and flame, standing twice the height of a man with wings of darkness that could fill an entire hall. It wielded a flaming sword and a whip of many thongs that burned with unquenchable fire. The mere presence of the Balrog caused stone to crack and melt, turned water to steam, and filled the hearts of even the bravest warriors with supernatural terror. For nearly 1,000 years it ruled Moria unchallenged, and orcs worshipped it as a god of destruction. The Balrog's power was demonstrated fully during the Fellowship's passage through Moria. Gandalf himself, a Maya of considerable power, immediately recognized the creature and knew that of all the Fellowship, only he had any chance against it. Their battle on the bridge of Khazad-dûm shook the foundations of the mountain. When Gandalf shattered the bridge with a word of command, the Balrog fell but caught Gandalf with its whip, dragging them both into the abyss. Their battle continued for 8 days straight, fighting from the deepest dungeons of Moria to the uttermost foundations of stone, through flooded passages where the Balrog's fire turned to molten rage, up the endless stair to the peak of Ziraxig. There, on Durin's tower, exposed to the sky for the first time in millennia, the Balrog burst into new flame that could be seen for miles. Gandalf finally slew it by throwing it down from the peak, breaking the mountainside where it fell, but the battle killed Gandalf as well, requiring divine intervention from Ilúvatar himself to return him to life. The death of Durin's Bane marked the end of the Balrogs in Middle-earth, the last echo of Morgoth's original rebellion against the harmony of creation. The Witch King of Angmar stood as the most powerful of the Nine Nazgûl, the ring-wraiths who served as Sauron's most terrible servants. Once a great king of men, possibly of Númenórean descent, he received one of the 9 rings of power from Sauron around 2251 of the Second Age. The ring granted him immense power and unnaturally long life, but gradually consumed his physical form until he existed as a wraith, neither living nor dead, bound eternally to Sauron's will through the power of the One Ring. For over 4,000 years he served as Sauron's chief lieutenant and most feared weapon. In 1300 of the Third Age, Sauron sent him north to establish the realm of Angmar, specifically to destroy the northern kingdom of Arnor. As the Witch King of Angmar, he waged war for nearly 700 years, commanding vast armies of orcs, trolls, and evil men. He possessed sorcerous powers that defied nature itself. He could summon darkness at will, turning day to night on the battlefield. His mere presence caused paralyzing fear in both men and beasts, making horses go mad with terror and brave warriors drop their weapons in despair. At the Battle of Fornost, he broke the gates with words of power alone, shattering iron and stone through dark sorcery. The Witch King wielded a Morgul blade that could transform its victims into lesser wraiths enslaved to his will, as he nearly did to Frodo at Weathertop. He commanded fell beasts, flying creatures from an earlier age that served as his mountain weapon. His greatest demonstration of power came during the siege of Minas Tirith. He broke the great gate of the city with the battering ram Grond, enhanced by his spells to the point where no earthly power could withstand it. When he entered the city, his presence alone was so terrible that Gandalf the White, wielding the flame of Ainur and the secret fire, stood as the only being in the city capable of facing him. The confrontation between them would have decided the fate of the city, but the arrival of the Rohirrim interrupted their duel. The prophecy stated that no man could kill him, and for over 1,000 years this seemed absolute. Weapons shattered against him, arrows could not pierce him, and even the combined might of Elrond and Glorfindel at the height of their power could only drive him away, not destroy him. Prince Ainur of Gondor challenged him to single combat twice, and twice the Witch King defeated him, the second time capturing and presumably killing the last king of Gondor, ending the line of Inarion. But prophecies in Middle-earth were tricky things. At the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, he mortally wounded King Theoden and would have slain many more, but Éowyn revealed herself as a woman, not a man, and with the help of Merry wielding a blade of Westernesse, specifically enchanted to harm the Witch King, she beheaded him, fulfilling the prophecy in a way he never anticipated. With his destruction, the remaining Nazgûl lost their greatest leader, and Sauron lost his most powerful servant, save only his own direct manifestation. Sauron the Deceiver was a Maiar of immense power who became the second Dark Lord and the primary antagonist of the Second and Third Ages of Middle-earth. Originally called Mairon, meaning the Admirable, he was created by Ilúvatar before the shaping of the world and served Aule the Smith among the Valar, becoming unmatched in his knowledge of crafting and the workings of physical matter. His fall came early as Morgoth corrupted him through promises of power and order, transforming the greatest of Aule's servants into his most terrible lieutenant. During the First Age, Sauron commanded Angband in Morgoth's absence and held the fortress of Tolkien, the Isle of Werewolves. His shape-shifting abilities were extraordinary, taking forms of a great wolf, a vampiric bat, and a serpent at will. Even Huan, the greatest hound that ever lived, could only defeat him with the aid of Lúthien's magic, and Sauron escaped only by yielding his physical form. After Morgoth's defeat, Sauron refused the summons to return to Valinor for judgment, and instead hid in Middle-earth, slowly rebuilding his power over 1,000 years. In the Second Age, Sauron achieved his greatest deception. Taking the fair form of Annatar, Lord of Gifts, he deceived the elven smiths of Egarrigen into forging the Rings of Power while he learned their craft. In secret, he returned to Mount Doom and forged the One Ring, pouring the greater part of his native power into it, creating a weapon that could dominate all other rings and their bearers. The ring made him nearly invincible, but also made his existence dependent upon it. When he wore it, his power exceeded that of any being in Middle-earth save the Valar themselves. His armies conquered vast territories, and even the combined might of Gil-galad and Elendil could only defeat him at the cost of their own lives. Sauron's mastery extended beyond physical might. He corrupted 9 great kings of men into the Nazgul, enslaved through the 9 rings. He could command the weather, creating the supernatural darkness that covered Mordor and extended his will across thousands of miles. Through the Palantir of Minas Ithil, he could dominate the minds of those who dared look into the Seeing Stones, as he did with Saruman and nearly did with Pippin. His eye, manifesting as a great flaming orb atop Barad-dûr, could pierce all shadows and veils, searching ceaselessly for the ring. The forging of the One Ring demonstrated Sauron's greatest strength and ultimate weakness. With it, he could perceive all that was done by the Lesser Rings, command armies through thought alone, and dominate the wills of entire nations. But when Isildur cut the ring from his finger, Sauron lost his physical form and spent nearly 3,000 years as a bodiless spirit, slowly regenerating his strength. Even diminished, he orchestrated the fall of Arnor through the Witch King, corrupted Saruman, and rebuilt Mordor into an impregnable fortress. By the War of the Ring, he commanded hundreds of thousands of orcs, trolls, Easterlings, and Southrons, the greatest host assembled since the last alliance. Yet his obsession with the ring blinded him to the possibility that anyone would seek to destroy it rather than use it. When Frodo finally cast the ring into Mount Doom, Sauron's entire being unraveled. His tower collapsed, his armies fled in terror, and his spirit dissipated into nothing, reduced to a powerless shadow that could never again take shape or hold sway over the world. Morgoth, originally named Melkor, stood as the first and greatest Dark Lord, the source of all discord and evil in Arda. Before the creation of the world, he was the mightiest of the Ainur, the holy ones created by Ilúvatar's thought. To Melkor alone was given portions of all the gifts of his fellow Valar, the strength of Tulkas, the crafts of Aula, the knowledge of Manwë, mastery over all elements and aspects of creation. His power in the beginning exceeded that of any single Valar, and rivaled their combined might. During the music of the Ainur, which sang the world into being, Melkor introduced themes of his own design, seeking to create independent of Ilúvatar's will. His discord created the extreme heats and colds, the chaos that would later manifest as evil in the world. When Ilúvatar showed the Ainur the vision of Arda, Melkor coveted it entirely for himself. He descended into the world with the other Valar, but immediately began marring their works, destroying whatever they created in his rage to dominate all existence. The Valar's every attempt to shape the world met with Melkor's corruption. He shattered the 2 lamps, Iluin and Ormal, that first lit the world, plunging it into darkness and destroying the original perfect symmetry of Arda. He waged war against the Valar for ages uncounted, raising the Iron Mountains and delving the fortress of Utumno deeper than any pit that would ever be made. In those dark places, he bred the first orcs from captured elves, corrupting them through unspeakable torments. He created trolls, dragons, Balrogs, vampires, werewolves, and countless other abominations. When the Valar retreated to Valinor, Morgoth ruled Middle-earth absolutely for ages, corrupting and tormenting the newly awakened elves. His power was so vast that when the Valar finally came to war against him, their battle reshaped the entire world, destroying landscapes and raising new mountains. Even chained with Ainur, the strongest chain ever forged, and imprisoned for 3 ages, his influence continued to corrupt the world. Upon his release, he destroyed the 2 trees of Valinor with Ungoliant's aid, murdered Finwë, and stole the Silmarils, the greatest works ever created by incarnate hands. The Silmarils burned him eternally, yet he wore them in his iron crown, accepting endless agony for the sake of possession. In Middle-earth, he raised Thangorodrim, 3 volcanic peaks that were the mightiest mountains ever piled, and rebuilt Angband as an impregnable fortress. His hosts included millions of orcs, thousands of Balrogs in the early days, and dragons beyond counting. Glaurung, the father of dragons, was but one of many, though Ancalagon the Black would later dwarf even him. Morgoth's personal might was beyond mortal comprehension. When Fangolfin, mightiest of all elven warriors, challenged him to single combat, Morgoth's hammer Grond created pits in the earth with each strike that became filled with fire and smoke. Even wounded 7 times by Fangolfin's sword, Ringel, Morgoth ultimately crushed the Elf King, though he limped forever after from the wounds received. His will alone could dominate entire armies, and his curses carried the weight of doom. The curse of Mandos upon the house of Feanor, the doom of Hurin's children, the dragon spell upon Tùrin's family, all demonstrated his ability to weave fate itself into weapons of despair. Yet Morgoth's greatest weakness was his dispersal of power. Unlike Sauron, who concentrated his might into the ring, Morgoth poured his essence into all his creations, and into Arda itself. The entire world became tainted with his element, called the Morgoth element, the source of all corruption, decay, and evil in existence. Goldlust, the fading of the elves, the mortality of men, the corruption of nature itself, all stemmed from his dispersed essence. This weakened him personally to the point where elves could wound him and eagles could mar his face. The War of Wrath finally ended Morgoth's reign. The host of Valinor, led by Eonwë, destroyed his armies in battles that shattered Beleriand and sank it beneath the sea. Ancalagon the Black's fall broke Thangorodrim. Morgoth himself was cast down, his feet hewn from under him, and he was thrust through the door of night into the timeless void, where he remains until the Dagor Dagorath, the final battle, when he will return for one last war that will end the world and begin it anew. Eru Ilúvatar, also called the One or the All-Father, was the supreme being of all existence, the creator of everything that was, is, or ever will be. Before creation, Eru alone existed in the timeless halls beyond the reach of the world. From his thought, he created the Ainur, the Holy Ones, each one a part of his mind, made independent. To them he proposed themes of music, and together they sang in harmony, though Eru alone comprehended the whole of their song. Through 3 great themes, the Ainur sang the world into potential being, with Eru adding the secret fire that would give it true life and independent existence. When Melkor introduced discord into the music, seeking to create themes of his own design, Eru incorporated even this rebellion into a greater harmony that Melkor could not comprehend. Eru showed the Ainur a vision of what their music had wrought. Arda, the world, with its full history from beginning to end. When some of the Ainur desired to enter this vision and shape it directly, Eru spoke Era, meaning let it be, and the universe sprang into actual existence. This act of creation established Eru's absolute sovereignty over all things. Even the Valar, mighty as they were but his servants and instruments. Eru's interventions in the world were rare but decisive, each one shaping the entire course of history. He alone created the races of his children, the elves, firstborn, and men, secondborn, giving them the secret fire that made them truly alive with independent wills that even the Valar could not dominate. When Alcha created the dwarves in impatience for the coming of the children, they were merely automatons until Eru took pity on Alcha's repentance and gave them true life, adopting them as his children as well. Each of Eru's gifts to his children defined their nature absolutely. To elves, he gave immortality bound to the world, their fate tied to Arda until its ending. To men, he gave the gift of death, the freedom to leave the world entirely, their fate beyond it known only to him. This gift, misunderstood and feared, was actually the greater blessing, freeing men from the cycles of the world and the slow decay that would claim even the elves. When Númenor grew proud and Ar-Pharazôn the Golden sailed against Valinor itself, demanding immortality from the Valar, Eru's response was swift and terrible. He broke and remade the world in an instant, changing it from flat to round, sinking Númenor beneath the waves in the greatest cataclysm since the shaping of Arda. The Undying Lands were removed from the circles of the world entirely, accessible only by the straight road that the elven ships could still sail. Millions died in seconds, an entire civilization erased, the very shape of reality altered permanently. Yet, even this was not his most subtle and important intervention. When Gollum fell into Mount Doom with the ring, many attributed it to chance or fate, but Gandalf suggested a greater power at work. Eru had promised that no theme could be played that did not have its uttermost source in him, that even evil would serve good in ways evil could not intend. The destruction of the ring in Sauron, accomplished not through strength or wisdom, but through pity, mercy, and the corruption of Gollum himself, demonstrated this perfectly. Eru worked through the free will of his creations, weaving their choices into patterns they could not perceive. Luthien Tinuviel was the most beautiful and powerful of all the children of Ilúvatar ever to walk Middle-earth, a half-Maya whose strength exceeded that of warriors and whose song could reshape reality itself. Born to Thingol, king of Doriath, and Melian the Maya, she inherited her mother's divine nature combined with the form and fate of the elves. Her beauty was so transcendent that when Beren first saw her dancing in the woods of Neldareth, he stood transfixed for an entire season, forgetting his own name and purpose. The light of the two trees before their destruction was captured in her appearance, making her shine with a radiance that had otherwise left the world forever. Her voice held power that defied comprehension. When she sang before Morgoth himself in Angband, the most powerful being in Arda fell asleep on his throne, his entire court of Balrogs, orcs, and wolves collapsing unconscious, the first and only time the Dark Lord was overcome by any force while in his fortress. Her song of mourning for Beren was so profound that Mandos, who had never been moved to pity in all the ages of the world, wept for the first and only time and restored Beren to life, an act unprecedented and never repeated. During her quest with Beren to steal a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown, Luthien displayed powers that seemed impossible for any incarnate being. At Tol in Garsoth, Sauron's fortress, she sang a song that shook the foundations of the Isle and broke Sauron's power, forcing him to yield the tower and flee in the form of a vampire. She commanded Carcharoth, the greatest wolf ever bred by Morgoth, to sleep with a word, though he was filled with the power of his master. Her cloak, woven from her own hair, could wrap its wearer in shadow and sleep, hiding them from all eyes and inducing slumber in any who looked upon it. Using the skin of the werewolf Drogluin and the fellbat Thurin-Withael, she and Beren penetrated Angband's defenses, passing through armies of orcs and Balrogs undetected. In Morgoth's throne room, she danced and sang with such power that the Iron Crown itself seemed to grow heavy on his head, and the weight of it bowed him down until he fell from his throne in sleep. The Silmarils blazed with increased radiance in her presence, recognizing something pure and powerful enough to touch them without pain. After Beren's death from Carcharoth's poisoned fangs, Luthien's grief was so intense that her spirit departed her body and traveled to the halls of Mandos itself, something no living being had done before or since. There she sang the tale of her love and sorrow with such perfection that the Valar themselves were moved to intervene in the natural order. Offered the choice to dwell in Valinor forever in bliss or return to Middle-earth with Beren as mortals, she chose mortality, becoming the first elf to die a mortal death and pass beyond the world. Through her choice, she established the half-elven line that would produce Elrond and Elros, and ultimately Aragorn, ensuring that her sacrifice would echo through all the ages of Middle-earth until the world's ending. Tùrin Turambar stood as the mightiest warrior of mankind in the First Age, yet also the most tragic, bearing Morgoth's curse that turned his every triumph into disaster. Son of Hurin and Morwen, he inherited his father's strength and his mother's pride, a combination that would bring doom to all he loved. When Hurin was captured after the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, Morgoth cursed him and all his bloodline with a doom of darkness that would follow them wherever they went. Turin's physical prowess exceeded that of any mortal man before or after. In Doriath, where he was fostered by Thingol, he grew taller and stronger than the elves themselves, mastering weapons with an ease that astounded his teachers. He wielded Anglsail, the black sword forged from meteoric iron by El the Dark Elf, later reforged as Gurthang, a blade that seemed to thirst for blood and would cleave through any armor or shield. In battle, Turin became a demon of destruction that orcs fled from in terror. As the dragon helm of Dor-Lomin, wearing the ancient heirloom of his house, he single-handedly held strategic passes against entire orc armies. Leading the outlaws of Brethil, he cleared entire regions of Morgoth's servants. His reputation grew so fearsome that Morgoth specifically marked him as the greatest threat among men to his dominion. At the Battle of Tumilad, though ultimately defeated, Tùrin personally slew hundreds of orcs in his rage, carving a path of destruction through their ranks that became legendary. The curse upon him manifested in every relationship he formed. He accidentally killed his best friend Beleg while in a madness, thinking him an enemy. His pride led to the fall of Nargothrond, when he convinced King Ordreth to abandon the secrecy that had protected the realm for centuries, building a great bridge that Glaurung the dragon used to destroy the kingdom. Every person who showed him kindness died horribly. Sarasage whom he drove to his death, Brandir whom he murdered in rage, and countless others who fell to the doom that surrounded him. The dragon Glaurung became his particular nemesis, using psychological manipulation rather than physical force against him. The dragon's spellbinding gaze held Tùrin frozen at Nargothrond while Finduilas, who loved him, was dragged away to her death. Glaurung's lies caused Tùrin to abandon his search for his mother and sister, leading to the ultimate tragedy of his life. Under the name Turambar, meaning Master of Doom, he thought he had escaped his fate in Brethil, marrying Niniel, who was actually his sister Ninor, under a dragon spell of forgetfulness. When Tùrin finally faced Glaurung at Cabadan Arras, he achieved what no other man had done, killing the father of dragons by stabbing up through his belly with Gurthang while the dragon crossed the ravine. But even in death, Glaurung's malice destroyed him. The dragon's last words revealed to Niniel her true identity, causing her to throw herself into the ravine in horror. When Tùrin learned the truth that he had married his own sister and driven her to suicide, he fell upon Gurthang, and the black sword which had drunk so much blood broke at his request and ended his life. Tùrin's death marked the fulfillment of Morgoth's curse, but prophecies spoke that in the last battle, Tùrin would return to deal Morgoth the final death blow, his suffering transformed into the ultimate instrument of justice against the one who had destroyed his life. Thingolfin, High King of the Noldor, achieved the greatest feat of single combat in all the histories of Middle-earth when he challenged Morgoth himself to a duel. After the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, when Morgoth's forces broke the siege of Angband and scattered the Elven realms, Thingolfin rode alone to the gates of Angband in a rage so terrible that his eyes shone like the eyes of the Valar, and all who saw him fled, thinking Orome himself had come. His horse Rockalor carried him across Anfalglith, the gasping dust, so swiftly that it seemed like fire running across the desolate plain. At Angband's gates, Thingolfin smote the doors and challenged Morgoth to single combat, calling him coward and lord of slaves. Morgoth could not refuse without losing face before his servants, though he feared the prophecy that his death would come from the children of Ilúvatar. The Dark Lord emerged from his fortress like a tower of iron, wielding Grond, the hammer of the underworld, each strike of which opened pits of fire and smoke in the earth. Thingolfin fought with Ringel, his sword that gleamed with ice, moving like lightning around Morgoth's strikes, a bright spark darting around a thundercloud of darkness. 7 times Thingolfin wounded Morgoth with Ringel, and 7 times Morgoth's black blood spouted forth, filling the pits Grond had made. The Dark Lord's cries of pain echoed across the battlefield, the first time any being had caused the mightiest of the Valar to scream in agony. But Thingolfin was mortal, and his strength began to fail. 3 times Morgoth bore him down with his shield, and 3 times Thingolfin rose again. Finally exhausted, he stumbled in one of the great pits Grond had created. Morgoth set his foot upon Thingolfin's neck to crush him, but with his last strength, the Elf King hewed at Morgoth's foot with Ringel, cutting deep enough that the Dark Lord would limp for the remainder of his time in Arda. Thorondor, King of Eagles, swooped down and scarred Morgoth's face with his talons while retrieving Thingolfin's body, denying the Dark Lord even the satisfaction of desecrating his enemy's corpse. Though Thingolfin died, his challenge proved that Morgoth could be wounded, could feel pain and fear, and was not invincible, inspiring hope in all who fought against the darkness in ages to come. Gil-galad, the last High King of the Noldor in Middle-earth, wielded power that marked the final flowering of elven might before their inevitable fading. His true parentage remained disputed even among the lore masters, but his majesty was unquestionable. He bore the spear Aeglos, which meant snow point, a weapon so deadly that none could withstand its thrust. His very name meant Star of Radiance, and he shone with a light that seemed to recall the glory of the Elder Days when the elves walked with the Valar. For over 3,000 years of the Second Age, Gil-galad ruled from Lindon, maintaining the last great elven realm in Middle-earth after the destruction of Beleriand. His power held back the shadow even as Sauron rose again, and his kingdom became a beacon of resistance against the darkness. When Sauron forged the One Ring and revealed his treachery, Gil-galad immediately perceived the trap and refused to be ensnared, keeping his ring Vilya safe and hidden. He orchestrated the resistance that prevented Sauron from completely dominating Middle-earth during the Dark Years. His foresight established the havens that would preserve elven culture for millennia, and his wisdom guided the resistance through centuries of warfare. When Númenor fell and the faithful washed up on Middle-earth's shores, Gil-galad allied with Elendil to form the last alliance of Elves and Men, the greatest military force assembled since the War of Wrath. The host they gathered was so vast that it took 3 years just to marshal and prepare it. At the Battle of Dagorlad, Gil-galad's tactical genius and personal prowess turned what could have been a catastrophic defeat into victory. Fighting at the forefront with Aeglos blazing like a star, he carved through Sauron's forces, his spear finding gaps in armor that arrows could not pierce, cutting down trolls and orcs with equal ease. The siege of Barad-dûr lasted 7 years, and throughout it all, Gil-galad maintained the alliance, prevented despair, and slowly tightened the noose around Sauron's fortress. When Sauron finally emerged for single combat, Gil-galad and Elendil together faced the Dark Lord on the slopes of Mount Doom. The battle was cataclysmic, with Sauron wielding the One Ring at the height of its power, his mace crushing stone and armor alike, his very touch bringing death. But Gil-galad's spear and Elendil's sword proved mightier still. Though both heroes perished in the effort, they cast Sauron down, breaking his body and creating the opportunity for Isildur to cut the ring from his hand. Gil-galad's death marked the end of the Noldoran kingdoms in Middle-earth and began the Age of Men's dominion, but his sacrifice ensured that evil would not triumph unopposed. Elendil the Tall stood as the greatest of the Númenóreans to survive the downfall, carrying the legacy of the Blessed Island to Middle-earth, and establishing the kingdoms that would define the Third Age. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, he embodied the physical perfection of Númenor's royal line, descended from Elros himself through dozens of generations. He wielded Narsil, the sword that would become legendary as the blade that cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand, a weapon forged in the First Age by the dwarves and bearing its own inherent power against evil. When Ar-Pharazôn's folly brought divine wrath upon Númenor, Elendil led 9 ships of the faithful away from destruction, guided by a vision of the catastrophe to come. The storms of the downfall drove his ships to Middle-earth with supernatural force, depositing them far inland in a miracle that established his divine favor. In Middle-earth, Elendil's natural authority and wisdom united the scattered Númenórean settlements into the realm of Arnor, while his sons Isildur and Anarion established Gondor in the south. These became the greatest kingdoms of men ever established, surpassing even Númenor in some ways, as they were built with humility rather than pride. The Palantiri, the Seeing Stones saved from Númenor, allowed him to maintain communication across vast distances, binding his realms together despite their separation. His reign brought civilization, learning, and hope to lands that had known only warfare and despair under Sauron's shadow. When Sauron attacked Gondor, capturing Minas Ithil and threatening to destroy everything the Númenóreans had built, Elendil formed the last alliance with Gil-galad. The combined armies they led represented every free people of Middle-earth united against darkness. At Dagorlad and during the siege of Barad-dûr, Elendil proved that the valor of Númenor had not diminished. His presence on the battlefield was like that of the great heroes of the Elder Days, inspiring men to fight beyond their normal capacity. In the final confrontation with Sauron, Elendil and Gil-galad together achieved what no others could have accomplished. Though Narsil broke beneath him and his body was crushed by Sauron's fall, Elendil's sacrifice created the moment that would define the next 3,000 years. His broken sword's hilt shard allowed Isildur to cut the ring from Sauron's hand, and though Isildur failed to destroy it, the opportunity for the ring's eventual destruction originated in Elendil's courage. The blood of Elendil became the measure of royalty for 3 millennia, with his heirs carrying the potential to reunite the kingdoms and restore the glory of the Númenórean realms. A prophecy finally fulfilled when Aragorn, his distant descendant, reclaimed the throne with Narsil reforged as Andúril. Galadriel, Lady of Lothlorien, was the mightiest elf remaining in Middle-earth during the Third Age, one of the few who remembered the light of the 2 trees before the sun and moon. Born in Valinor as one of the greatest of the Noldor, she was the only woman among the leaders of the rebellion against the Valar, though she took no oath and committed no kinslaying. Her hair captured the light of Lorelin and Telperion, the 2 trees, and inspired Feanor himself to create the Silmarils, though she refused him even a single strand. Standing unusually tall even for the Noldor, she possessed physical strength to match any warrior, though her true power lay in wisdom, will, and magic accumulated over thousands of years. Throughout the ages, Galadriel's power grew rather than diminished. She learned from Melian the Maya in Duriath, studying the arts of protection and concealment that would later preserve Lothlorien. She perceived Sauron's deception when he came as Annatar, alone among the elven leaders, seeing through his fair disguise to the darkness beneath. When the One Ring revealed Sauron's treachery, she took possession of Nenya, one of the 3 elven rings, using it to preserve and protect rather than to dominate. Under her rule, Lothlorien became a realm outside time, where the Elder Days seemed to live again and decay could not touch. The power of Nenya, combined with her own abilities, created a barrier that even Sauron himself feared to assault directly. Her mirror showed visions of things that were, things that are, and things that yet might be, a power of foresight exceeding that of the Palantiri. When the Fellowship arrived in Lothlorien, she tested each member's heart telepathically, offering them their deepest desires and seeing who would succumb to temptation. Her gift-giving demonstrated supernatural insight. Elven cloaks that hid the wearer from unfriendly eyes, limbus that sustained beyond natural food, the phial containing the light of Erendil's star that would pierce the darkness of Shelob's tunnel, and Mordor itself. When Frodo offered her the One Ring, the greatest test of her entire existence, she experienced a vision of herself as a terrible queen, beautiful and terrible as the dawn, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All would love her and despair, but she rejected it, accepting diminishment and departure from Middle-earth rather than becoming a tyrant. During the War of the Ring, while attention focused on Gondor and Rohan, Galadriel waged her own war against Dol Guldur. 3 times the forces of darkness assaulted Lothlorien, and 3 times her power threw them back. After Sauron's defeat, she personally led the assault that destroyed Dol Guldur, throwing down its walls and cleansing the Fortress of Evil, displaying offensive power that had been hidden throughout the age. Her departure into the West marked the final end of the Elder Days' echo in Middle-earth, taking with her memories and power that reached back to the world's spring. Ancalagon the Black was the greatest of all winged dragons, the mightiest creature ever to serve Morgoth, whose size and power exceeded comprehension. Bred by Morgoth in the pits of Angband during the War of Wrath as his final and most terrible weapon, Ancalagon was to dragons what mountains are to hills. When he emerged from Angband leading the winged dragon host, his appearance turned the tide of battle that had gone against Morgoth for decades. His shadow blotted out the sun, his wings created hurricanes with each beat, and his fire was hot enough to melt entire armies in seconds. The hosts of Valinor, which had systematically destroyed Morgoth's armies and broken the siege of Angband, were driven back in terror and dismay. Ancalagon's size defied nature itself. When he fell, his body shattered the volcanic peaks of Thangorodrim, mountains that had stood as the mightiest ever raised since the shaping of the world. These peaks, each one taller than any mountain in Middle-earth during later ages, were completely destroyed by the impact of his corpse. His fire exceeded that of Glaurung and all other dragons combined, capable of melting the strongest fortresses and consuming entire battlefields in a single breath. The heat of his presence alone killed anything that came too close, and his scales were impervious to any weapon forged by elves, men, or dwarves. For a full day and night, Ancalagon and his dragon host dominated the battlefield, reversing 40 years of defeat in hours. The flying dragons under his command devastated the forces of the Valar, raining death from above where no sword or spear could reach them. It seemed that even the host from Valinor might fail before this final unleashing of Morgoth's malice. Only Eärendil the Mariner, sailing his flying ship Gil-galad through the skies with a Silmaril bound to his brow, could challenge Ancalagon in his own element. Their battle in the heavens lasted through a full day and night, visible to all below as flashes of light and darkness wrestling above the clouds. Eärendil, though a half-elf of mortal origin, had been blessed by the Valar and carried the light of a Silmaril, one of the 3 holy jewels that contained the last unsullied light of the 2 trees. The battle between them was the climax of the War of Wrath, the mightiest dragon ever spawned against the brightest light remaining in Middle-earth. When Eärendil finally struck the killing blow, Ancalagon's fall from the sky was like a mountain dropping from heaven. The impact not only destroyed Thangorodrim but created earthquakes that helped trigger the breaking of Beleriand itself. With Ancalagon's death, the dragon host scattered, Morgoth's last hope disappeared, and the War of Wrath moved to its inevitable conclusion. No dragon that came after, not even Smaug the Golden at the height of his power, achieved even a fraction of Ancalagon's terrible majesty. Eärendil the Mariner transcended mortality to become the greatest hero of both elves and men, the bearer of the morning and evening star, and the slayer of Ancalagon the Black. Born of the union between Tuor of the House of Hador and Idril of Gondolin, he inherited the destinies of both kindreds and carried the hope of all Middle-earth to the Undying Lands. His journey to Valinor, which no mortal had achieved since the world's shaping, broke the ban of the Valar through the power of the Silmaril and his wife Elwing's transformation into a bird by Ulmo's grace. When he stood before the powers of the world, he spoke for both elves and men, pleading for aid against Morgoth with words that moved even Mandos to agreement. The Valar not only pardoned his transgression, but elevated him beyond mortal existence, setting him to sail the heavens forever with the Silmaril bound to his brow, becoming the star of hope that would inspire resistance against evil for all the ages to come. In the War of Wrath, Arundel commanded a flying ship Gil-galad, hallowed by the Valar and lifted into the air to battle the winged dragons. His defeat of Ancalagon represented the victory of hope over despair, a half-elf with a holy jewel destroying the mightiest monster ever created. The light of his Silmaril burned dragons like acid, pierced any darkness, and could not be dimmed by any shadow. That same light would later be captured in Galadriel's phial, helping Frodo and Sam navigate Mordor itself. Arendel's voyages through the sky made him witness to all the great events of the world, watching the rise and fall of kingdoms, the victories and defeats of the free peoples, eternally sailing as a sign that the Valar had not forgotten Middle-earth. His sons Elrond and Elros chose the fates of elves and men respectively, establishing the lines that would preserve wisdom and kingdom through all the ages until the world's remaking. Through Elros came the kings of Númenor and eventually Aragorn. Through Elrond came the preservation of lore and sanctuary that enabled the ring's destruction. Every dawn and dusk, when his star appeared, it reminded all who fought against darkness that a mortal man had once sailed to the Undying Lands, convinced the gods to intervene, and personally struck down the greatest dragon ever spawned. Thus ends the accounting of Middle-earth's mightiest beings, each one shaping the world through power, wisdom, or sacrifice, their legacies echoing until the breaking of the world and the singing of the second music. The Mumakil were Middle-earth's most fearsome instruments of absolute chaos, enormous mobile battle elephants capable of trampling entire armies with a single charge. The largest measured up to 100 feet in length, which is basically we're all gonna die size. A big part of their internal rage was dedicated to crushing everything, and the massive hatred reactor that powered their desire to step on hobbits. The Mumakil were divided into a front end that will murder you and a back end that will also murder you. This housed the main tusks, legs the size of tree trunks, and war howdahs where Sauron archers were having the time of their lives shooting down at tiny people. Each beast was managed by millions of years of evolution specifically designed to make Rohirrim horses question their life choices. To move, they relied on 4 legs that converted grass and hatred into unstoppable momentum. Due to their immense size, they simulated the gravitational pull of approaching doom. The war towers included elevated platforms where Sauron soldiers could talk about their latest day of holy crap, we're riding a literal mountain over field rations. The tusks were powered directly by I am large and you are not energy. When charging at full power, they could destroy a cavalry charge in seconds. Their power could be adjusted to only destroy your will to live, as seen at Pelennor Fields when they showed up and everyone collectively went, oh no. The concept originated with Mother Nature's what if elephants but bigger and angrier experiment. The Southrons saw potential in large animal military advantage and spent thousands of years making them more terrifying through selective breeding. Southron's recruiters refined the concept of mobile siege engines that eat grass. A main issue was teaching them not to step on their own soldiers. Feeding them was among the greatest challenges. Each beast required exact nutritional calibration or risk having your secret weapon die of hunger before battle. The logistics demanded complete military redesign around how do we transport creatures the size of buildings. The Mumakil were said to be unstoppable due to their enormous size. However, Legolas built in a critical design flaw where shooting them with enough arrows in exactly the right spots could bring them down, which was overlooked by the surely nothing can kill a creature this large philosophy. This weakness was used at Pelennor Fields to neutralize the beasts, though not before they caused absolute mayhem and permanent psychological trauma. So basically, Tolkien looked at regular elephants and said, but what if they were weapons of mass destruction? And honestly, valid. Varda Elentäri was the most powerful of the queens of the Valar and the creator of the stars themselves. Her origins stretch back before the creation of Arda, when she dwelt with Eru Ilúvatar in the Timeless Halls alongside the other Ainur. During the great music that shaped reality, Varda's themes wove light itself into existence, establishing her dominion over all radiance in the universe. When she descended into Ea with the other Valar, she took physical form as a being of overwhelming beauty whose face radiated light too brilliant for any mortal or even most immortals to behold directly. In the earliest days before the awakening of the elves, Varda undertook her greatest work by kindling the stars from the dews of Telperion, creating countless points of light including Carnil, Luanil, Nennar, Lumbar, Alcarinco, and Elamire. She gathered the ancient light that Melkor had dispersed and formed new constellations specifically to herald the coming of the Firstborn, including Menelmacar with his shining belt, later called Orion, and Velasirka, the sickle of the Valar that stood as a sign of doom for Morgoth in the north. The elves called her Elbereth Gilthaniel, Star-Kindler, and loved her above all the Valar because she had prepared the skies for their awakening. Her power extended far beyond mere creation of celestial bodies, as she possessed the ability to hear any cry for aid spoken in Middle-earth, especially those uttered in darkness or despair. The light she placed in Arendil's Silmaril became the Evening Star, the most beloved star of the elves, and her name alone carried such power that servants of darkness could not endure its utterance. When Sam invoked her name in Cirith Ungol, the very mention of Elbereth caused the Watcher's will to break and their forms to crumble. Orcs fled in terror when elves sang hymns to Varda, and even Shelob retreated from the light of Arendil's star captured in Galadriel's phial. She resided on Tanaketil, the highest mountain in all Arda, alongside her spouse Manwë, and from their halls of Ilmarin she could perceive everything that occurred in the world below. Her throne beside Manwë allowed them to see further than any other beings in existence when their powers combined. The light that emanated from her face was said to be the light of Ilúvatar himself, making her not just powerful but a direct conduit of the Creator's own radiance into the world. Before the creation of the sun and moon, Varda's stars were the only light in Middle-earth, making her directly responsible for enabling the awakening of the elves at Cuiviénen. The hallowing she placed upon the Silmarils made them burn any evil flesh that touched them, demonstrating her ability to imbue objects with divine properties that endured forever. Her rejection of Melkor before the creation of Arda, when he sought her in marriage, marked the beginning of his special hatred for her above all other Valar. The lamps of the Valar, Ilwyn and Ormel, which first lit the world, contained light that Varda had gathered and refined from the cosmic void. When creating stars, she didn't simply place lights in the sky, but wove them into patterns that told stories and prophecies, encoding messages that only the wise could fully interpret across ages. Manwë Solomo was the elder king of Arda and the mightiest of all the Valar in authority, though not in raw strength. He was the brother of Melkor and Ilúvatar's thought, created to be his equal in power but opposite in nature, choosing harmony where Melkor chose discord. As the appointed vice-regent of Ilúvatar, Manwë held absolute authority over all of Arda, commanding not just the Valar but having dominion over every living thing that drew breath. His sphere of influence encompassed the wind and air, from the smallest breeze to the mightiest tempest, and through the winds he could perceive and influence events anywhere in Arda simultaneously. The great eagles, including Thorondor with his wingspan of 180 feet, served as his personal messengers and were created by him before the awakening of the children of Ilúvatar. During the War of Wrath, Manwë commanded the host of Valinor, the most powerful military force ever assembled, consisting of Maiar, Vanir elves, and beings of such might that their march shattered Beleriand and reshaped the entire western coast of Middle-earth. His judgments were final and absolute, demonstrated when he cast Melkor into the void, a feat requiring not physical strength but authority over the very fabric of reality itself. Unlike other Valar who might act independently, Manwë maintained constant communion with Ilúvatar, making him the only being in Arda who could claim to know the Creator's will directly. When he sat upon his throne on Tanaquetil with Varda beside him, their combined sight could pierce through all shadows and veils, seeing into the hearts of all beings and across all the spheres of the world. He commanded the allegiance of all good spirits and could summon the powers of all the Valar united, when necessity demanded, as he did when pronouncing the doom of Mandos or preparing for the final assault on Angband. His breath itself was the source of all life-giving airs in Arda, and his voice, speaking in wrath, could crack mountains and split the foundations of the earth. Even Melkor, at the height of his power, feared direct confrontation with Manwë when the Elder King's full authority was roused. Yet despite this overwhelming might, Manwë deliberately chose to rule through wisdom and mercy rather than force, intervening directly only when the balance of the world itself was threatened. The sapphire scepter of Manwë was said to be carved from a fragment of Ilúvatar's throne itself, granting him the authority to speak binding judgments that reality itself would enforce. His understanding of the music of the Ainur was more complete than any save, perhaps Ilúvatar, allowing him to perceive how current events connected to the grand themes that shaped existence. When he released Melkor from his 3 ages of imprisonment, it wasn't naivety, but rather adherence to a divine plan he perceived but could not fully alter. The eagles he created weren't merely servants but extensions of his will, their eyes serving as his throughout Middle-earth, which is why Gwaihir could arrive precisely when needed during crucial moments. During the drowning of Númenor, Manwë's sorrow was so great that storms raged across all of Arda for 7 days, demonstrating how his emotions could affect the physical world. Ulmo, Lord of Waters, was unique among the Valar as he dwelt alone and seldom came to the councils in Valinor, preferring the depths of the seas to the halls of Manwë. His power flowed through every drop of water in Arda, from the smallest mountain spring to the vast deeps of Beligheir, making him omnipresent in a way that even other Valar were not. Before the creation of Arda, Ulmo's themes in the great music were the most profound and beautiful, weaving together the sounds of all waters that would ever be, and even Melkor's discord could not wholly mar their beauty, but instead increase their sorrow and depth. He moved through Middle-earth constantly via its rivers and streams, maintaining awareness of all events through the waters that touched every land, which is why he knew of the sufferings of elves and men when other Valar remained unaware in their bliss in Valinor. His horn, the Ulamuri, created from white shells by the Maiar Salmar, produced music that once heard could never be forgotten, instilling an unquenchable longing for the sea in any who heard it. During the flight of the Noldor, Ulmo directly intervened more than any other Valar, appearing to Turgon and Finrod in dreams to guide them to establish Gondolin and Nargothrond, the hidden realms that would shelter the free peoples for centuries. He raised Tuor as his specific instrument, appearing to him directly at Viniamar in a form so terrible and magnificent that Tuor fell to his face, making Ulmo one of the only Valar to manifest in full glory to a mortal man. The Lord of Waters possessed the power to alter coastlines, as he did when helping to hide Gondolin by shrouding the veil in mists and shadows that confounded even the spies of Morgoth. His protection over Elwing when she cast herself into the sea demonstrated his ability to transform mortals, changing her into a seabird to carry the Silmaril to Isarendil. Unlike Manwë, who acted through authority and law, Ulmo operated through inspiration and dreams, planting visions in the minds of the children of Ilúvatar that would manifest years or decades later. The music of water itself carried his messages, which is why the fountains of Gondolin and streams of Doriath could convey warnings and wisdom to those who knew how to listen. Even in the depths of Autumno and later Angband, water that seeped through rock and stone carried Ulmo's power, allowing him alone among the Valar to contest Melkor's dominion in his own fortresses. Ungoliant was a primordial entity of darkness, whose origins remained unknown even to the Valar, though she took the form of a monstrous spider of ever-changing size. Some claimed she arose from the darkness itself that lay about Arda, others that she was a corrupted Maya who had entered the void and become something far worse, but none knew the truth. Her power was unique in all of Arda, as she could devour light itself, creating a darkness that was not merely the absence of light, but an active, hungry void that consumed elimination. When she drank the light of the 2 trees of Valinor with Melkor, she grew to such hideous size and power that even Morgoth, the mightiest of all created beings, feared her and could not command her. The unlight she wove from her body was described as darkness visible, creating webs that could trap not just physical beings but light and hope themselves, forming barriers that even the Valar struggled to penetrate. After draining the 2 trees, she demanded the Silmarils from Morgoth, and when he refused, she bound him in her webs, and the Dark Lord who had defied all the Valar united was helpless before her hunger. Only the arrival of the Balrogs, summoned by Morgoth's desperate cry that echoed across all Beleriand, saved him from being devoured entirely. She bred with the great spiders of the Mountains of Terror and produced offspring that would plague Middle-earth for ages, passing on her ability to weave darkness and corrupt light to lesser degrees. Her hunger was infinite and could never be satisfied, driving her to eventually devour herself in the wastes of the south, though some claim she endured in the forgotten places of the world where light had never touched. The terror she inspired was so profound that even millennia later, her last known spawn, Shelob, was called the last child of Ungoliant, to trouble the unhappy world, suggesting her evil transcended normal physical destruction. During her assault on the 2 trees, she moved faster than thought despite her enormous bulk, and her webs were strong enough to hold beings of Maya-level power indefinitely. The Valar themselves avoided direct confrontation with her after she fled Valinor, suggesting that even they were uncertain of victory against a creature that existed outside the normal order of creation. The poison she injected into the 2 trees wasn't merely destructive but corrupting, tainting the very essence of light so that not even Yavanna could heal them completely. Her ability to multiply herself through spawning created a network network of lesser darknesses across Middle-earth, each spider carrying a fragment of her primordial hunger. The Girdle of Melian, one of the strongest protective enchantments ever woven, was specifically reinforced against the spider creatures of the Mountains of Terror, showing how deeply the Maiar feared Ungoliant's offspring. When she consumed gems and crystals, she didn't just destroy them, but unmade their light retroactively, erasing the memory of their brilliance from the world. Her webs could entangle not just physical beings, but concepts themselves, which is why those caught in her snares often forgot hope, love, and even their own names. The true horror of Ungoliant lay not in her physical form, but in what she represented, being a manifestation of the primordial void that existed before creation, the absence that preceded existence itself. Her ability to grow from consumption was limitless, and had she devoured the Silmarils, some believe she would have grown large enough to swallow Arda entirely, becoming a black hole of spiritual emptiness. The darkness she created was described as having weight and substance, pressing down on those within it like deep ocean water, making breathing difficult and movement sluggish. Her offspring inherited diluted versions of her powers, with each generation growing weaker, yet even the smallest spiders of Mirkwood carried enough of her essence to inspire instinctive terror in all living things. The regions where she passed during her flight from Valinor remained corrupted for ages, with the land itself remembering her presence and rejecting any attempt at healing or cultivation. Her hunger wasn't merely physical, but existential, seeking to devour not just matter but meaning itself, which is why Morgoth feared her despite his own immense power. The void she left in the world after consuming the light of the two trees could never be completely filled, creating a permanent scar in the fabric of reality that made the recreation of their light impossible. During her confrontation with Morgoth over the Silmarils, the Balrog's whips of flame barely drove her back, and some accounts suggest she allowed herself to be driven off rather than being truly defeated. The sound of her feeding was described as the opposite of music, an anti-harmony that undid the themes of creation wherever it was heard. Her ability to spawn without a mate suggested she could reproduce through division, each offspring being a smaller fragment of her original essence, explaining why her children, while terrible, never matched her power. Shelob was the last great spawn of Ungoliant to plague Middle-earth, dwelling in the tunnels of Cirith Ungol for thousands of years before the War of the Ring. She inherited her mother's ability to weave darkness into physical form, creating tunnels of shadow that light could barely penetrate, though she lacked Ungoliant's power to devour light entirely. Her body had grown vast over the millennia, with a bloated bag of a belly and legs with knobbed joints that rose high above her back, each leg ending in a claw that could pierce steel. Unlike common spiders that fed on blood, Shelob feasted on the flesh and life force of her victims, preferring the blood of elves and men but consuming orcs when nothing else was available. She had made a pact with Sauron himself, or rather existed in an understanding where he provided her with prey through his fortress of Cirith Ungol, and she guarded the secret stair, though she served no one and acknowledged no master. Her intelligence far exceeded that of a mere beast, as she could remember events from thousands of years past and held grudges against entire bloodlines, particularly the line of Elendil. The darkness she exuded was not merely physical but spiritual, inducing despair and madness in those who entered her tunnels, causing even hardened warriors to lose their way and surrender to fear. Her hide was harder than horn or scale, impervious to normal weapons, and even Sting, a blade of Gondolin make, could barely pierce her skin when wielded with desperate strength. She possessed multiple eyes that could see in absolute darkness, but they were also her weakness, being the only truly vulnerable part of her body. When she battled Sam Gamgee, she had never known defeat in thousands of years of existence, having devoured countless warriors, including orcs, men, and elves who attempted to pass through her domain. Her venom could paralyze victims while keeping them alive for days or weeks, preserving them fresh for her feeding. The mere rumor of her presence was enough to deter entire armies from attempting to use the pass of Cirith Ungol, making her more effective than 1,000 orc guards. Her offspring spread throughout the dark places of Middle-earth, though none achieved her size or power, being mere shadows of Ungoliant's original darkness. Smaug the Terrible was the last and greatest of the fire drakes of the north to survive into the Third Age, claiming the title of the chiefest and greatest of calamities. He emerged from the Grey Mountains in TA 2770 and descended upon Erebor with such fury that the mountainside itself cracked and split from the heat of his coming. His body stretched nearly 150 feet in length, covered in scales like overlapping steel plates that no normal weapon could pierce, with only his belly showing any vulnerability where he had pressed gems and gold into his flesh over centuries of sleeping on treasure. The fire he breathed was not ordinary flame, but dragon fire of such intensity that it could melt the rings of power themselves, save only the one ring, and reduce entire cities to ash and slag in minutes. His intelligence matched his physical might, possessing knowledge accumulated over centuries and the ability to cast hypnotic spells with his voice and gaze, bending weaker minds to his will or freezing them in terror. When he took Erebor, he slaughtered thousands of dwarves and men in a single day, destroying the entire kingdom of Dale as an afterthought, demonstrating that entire civilizations were merely inconveniences to him. His senses were so acute that he could detect the removal of a single golden cup from his vast hoard while sleeping, and could smell the difference between dwarf, man, and hobbit from the faintest trace of scent. The desolation he created around the Lonely Mountain persisted for nearly 2 centuries, with the land remaining barren and poisoned by his mere presence, earning the region the name Desolation of Smaug. He possessed the dragon spell, an enchantment that grew stronger with age, allowing him to bewitch those who looked upon him or heard his voice, making them reveal their deepest secrets or become paralyzed with dragon fear. His wings could create winds strong enough to topple buildings when he flew, and his tail was a weapon in itself, capable of smashing through stone walls and crushing dozens of warriors in a single sweep. During his attack on Lake Town, he demonstrated tactical brilliance by setting the lake itself on fire, using the wooden buildings and docks as fuel to create an inescapable inferno. Even in death, his blood was poisonous, and his bones were prized for their magical properties, while his hoard carried a curse that brought madness and greed to those who claimed it. The wealth Smaug accumulated wasn't random but carefully selected, as he could sense the history and power in objects, keeping items of significance while discarding others, regardless of monetary value. His knowledge encompassed ancient history, languages, and riddles, having learned much during his centuries of life, and from the treasures he studied in his hoard. The heat of his body was so intense that he left molten footprints in stone, and the air around him shimmered like a desert mirage even when he was at rest. His voice carried a hypnotic quality that grew stronger the longer one listened, which is why Bilbo's conversations with him became increasingly dangerous as they progressed. The dragon sickness that affected those who coveted his treasure was partially caused by microscopic scales he shed, which carried a psychic poison that amplified greed and paranoia. Glaurung the Golden was the first of the fire drakes and the father of all dragons, bred by Morgoth in the depths of Angband through dark sorcery and corruption. Unlike his offspring who developed naturally, Glaurung was personally shaped by Morgoth's will, making him not just a beast but a conscious weapon of malice with intelligence that rivaled the wisest of elves. He emerged prematurely from Angband in his youth and was driven back by mounted archers, teaching Morgoth to keep him hidden until he reached full size and power. By the time of his maturity, Glaurung had grown to such might that he led the vanguard in the Battle of Sudden Flame, breaking the siege of Angband single-handedly by creating a river of fire that consumed everything in its path. His power over minds exceeded even Smaug's, as demonstrated when he held Tùrin and Ainur in his spell, erasing memories, implanting false thoughts, and weaving destinies of tragedy that would unfold exactly as he foresaw. The title Father of Dragons was not merely genealogical but magical, as Glaurung possessed abilities that later dragons lost, including the power to take on different forms and to project his consciousness across vast distances. During the sack of Nargothrond, he paralyzed Tùrin with nothing but his gaze and words, forcing him to watch as Finduilas was dragged away to torment, demonstrating cruelty that was calculated and personal rather than bestial. His eyes were described as windows into the void itself, containing not just malice but the active will of Morgoth, making those who looked into them see their own doom reflected back. He could not be harmed by any weapon while conscious, as his will alone could turn aside blades and arrows, requiring either stealth or overwhelming force to wound him. When he crossed Beleriand, he left trenches in the earth that became permanent geographical features, and his breath poisoned rivers so thoroughly that they remained toxic for decades. His death came only through Tùrin's black sword Gurthang, forged from meteoric iron, striking from beneath while Glaurung crossed the ravines of Capan. Glaurung's creation involved the corruption of sacred fire itself, as Morgoth perverted the flame imperishable that Ilúvatar alone possessed, creating instead a consuming hunger that destroyed rather than created. His growth was accelerated through feeding on the life force of captured elves, each consumed soul adding to his size and malevolence, which explained his unusual intelligence and ability to understand the deepest fears of the Firstborn. The dragon's body was a fortress unto itself, with scales that weren't merely armor but active defenses that could sense approaching threats and shift to deflect blows before they landed. His blood was liquid flame that burned hotter than any forge, capable of melting through stone and metal alike. making even wounding him dangerous to attackers. During the destruction of Beleriand, Glaurung demonstrated the ability to command lesser dragons through thought alone, coordinating attacks across hundreds of miles as if the entire dragon host shared a single mind. The curse he laid upon Tùrin wasn't simple magic, but a manipulation of fate itself, twisting the threads of destiny that the Valar had woven, showing his power extended into metaphysical realms. His presence alone could wither plant life for miles around, not through heat, but through a spiritual poison that drained the will to live from all growing things. The bridge at Nargothrond that he used as his bed became fused into a single piece of stone from the heat and pressure of his body, creating an inadvertent monument to his power that lasted long after his death. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the mind, making it impossible to ignore or misunderstand his words, regardless of language barriers. The treasure hoard he gathered at Nargothrond was arranged in specific patterns that amplified his power, using the golden gems as a magical battery that made him stronger the longer he remained there. Gothmog was the High Captain of Angband and Lord of the Balrogs, the most powerful of Morgoth's servants after Sauron himself. As a Maiar who had been corrupted in the beginning of days, Gothmog possessed power that exceeded any earthly creature, wielding weapons of flame and shadow that could cleave through enchanted armor and shields. He personally slew Fëanor, the mightiest of all elves, surrounding him with other Balrogs and dealing the mortal wounds that even the creator of the Silmarils could not withstand. During the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, Gothmog led the host of Angband and personally killed Fingon, High King of the Noldor, first binding him with his whip of flame, then crushing him beneath his black axe. His tactical brilliance matched his physical might as he commanded not just Balrogs but dragons, armies of orcs, and other creatures of darkness with strategic genius that turned potential defeats into crushing victories. The fear he inspired was so great that entire battalions of elves and men would break and flee at the sight of him approaching, wreathed in darkness and flame that consumed everything nearby. He stood taller than the tallest elf, with a form that constantly shifted between shadow and substance, making him difficult to strike even for those brave enough to face him. His whip could extend to impossible lengths, binding victims from great distances, while his axe was said to have been forged in the heart of Angband from metals that existed nowhere else in Arda. During the fall of Gondolin, Gothmog led the final assault, breaking through gates that had stood for centuries and bringing down the hidden city that was considered impregnable. In that battle, he met his end at the hands of Ecthelion of the Fountain, who drove his spike-helmeted head into Gothmog's body as they both fell into the Fountain of the King, where the waters extinguished the Balrog's flames forever. The mutual destruction of Gothmog and Ecthelion became legendary, as it took one of the greatest elf lords sacrificing himself to destroy Morgoth's most terrible captain. His death marked a turning point in Morgoth's power, as no other Balrog ever arose to take his place as High Captain, and the organization of Angband's forces never recovered the same strategic cohesion. Fëanor was the mightiest of all the children of Ilúvatar in craft, lore, and native power, surpassing every elf who came before or after him. His mother Míriel gave so much of her strength to his creation that she died of weariness after his birth, making him unique among all elves as one whose birth demanded such sacrifice. He created the Silmarils, the greatest works ever crafted by any incarnate being, capturing the light of the two trees in imperishable crystals that even the Valar marveled at, and Morgoth lusted after above all treasures. His skill extended beyond jewelcraft to include the invention of the Tengwar script, improvements to the Serati of Rûmil, and countless other works of art and knowledge that advanced Elvish civilization immeasurably. The Palantiri, the seeing stones that would later prove crucial in Middle-earth's history, were quite possibly his creation, demonstrating his ability to imbue crystal with powers of sight that transcended space and time. His spirit burned so fiercely that his body could barely contain it, giving him energy and passion that made other elves seem dim by comparison, driving him to achievements in decades that others could not accomplish in millennia. When he drew his sword against Fingolfin, the Valar themselves intervened through Manwë's herald, showing that his wrath was considered dangerous enough to warrant divine intervention. During the flight of the Noldor, he led his people through the Helcaraxes grinding ice despite the doom of Mandos, his will alone keeping thousands moving through conditions that should have destroyed them. In his final battle, he fought multiple Balrogs simultaneously for days, killing several before Gothmog arrived with reinforcements, a feat unmatched by any other elf in history. His death was unlike any other, as his spirit burned so hot that it reduced his body to ash instantly, and Mandos confirmed he would never be reincarnated while Arda endured. sword, keeping him in the halls until the end of time. The oath of Feanor that he swore with his sons became a force of destiny itself, driving events throughout the First Age and causing more tragedy than any other words ever spoken. Even the Valar could not unmake what Feanor had wrought, as the Silmarils remained beyond their power to recreate or destroy, marking him as a creator whose works transcended even divine ability to replicate. Glorfindel was among the most powerful elves to ever exist, unique in being the only known elf to return from death with enhanced power comparable to a Maiar. In his first life, he was a lord of Gondolin and chief of the House of the Golden Flower, already mighty enough to stand against demons of shadow and flame. During the fall of Gondolin, he fought a Balrog in single combat on the narrow mountain pass of Cirith-Thorenath, killing the demon but falling to his death, sacrificing himself to save the refugees, including Arundil's parents. His sacrifice was deemed so noble that Mandos released his spirit after a brief time, and the Valar not only restored his body but enhanced his native power to near Maiar levels. When he returned to Middle-earth in the Second Age, he brought with him authority from Valinor itself, making him one of the few beings Sauron genuinely feared to face directly. His spiritual power was so great that he existed simultaneously in both the seen and unseen worlds, appearing to Frodo's eyes at the Ford of Bruin as a figure of white light that drove back the Nazgul. The Witch King of Angmar, Lord of the Nine, fled rather than face Glorfindel in single combat at the Battle of Fornost, recognizing an enemy who could destroy him permanently. His prophecy that not by the hand of man will he fall demonstrated foresight granted by his time in Valinor, seeing centuries into the future with clarity that exceeded even Elrond's wisdom. During the Third Age, he could ride openly against all 9 Nazgul together, his presence alone enough to scatter them, as beings of shadow could not endure the light that emanated from his enhanced spirit. His horse Asphaloth was likewise touched by his power, running faster than any normal steed and showing no fear of the ringwraiths that terrified all other animals. The authority he carried from the Valar made him effectively their representative in Middle-earth, similar to the Istari but without their limitations, retaining full memory and power from his time in the Blessed Realm. Even Gandalf deferred to Glorfindel's judgment in matters of spiritual danger, recognizing him as an equal or possibly superior in pure power, though Gandalf held greater responsibility for Middle-earth's fate. Elrond Half-Elven was master of Rivendell and one of the mightiest and wisest beings remaining in Middle-earth during the Third Age, bearing the ring Vilya, mightiest of the 3. His heritage combined all the great lines of Elves and Men, being descended from Thingol and Melian, Turgon, Feanor's line through marriage, and the houses of Hador and Haleth, giving him a nobility that exceeded kings. He had lived through 3 ages of the world, witnessing the fall of Beleriand, the defeat of Sauron, and the decline of both elves and men, accumulating wisdom that spans 6,000 years. Vilya, the Ring of Air, granted him power over healing and preservation, allowing him to maintain Rivendell as a sanctuary where time seemed slowed and evil could not enter unless he willed it. His healing abilities surpassed all others in Middle-earth, able to cure wounds both physical and spiritual that would defeat lesser healers, including the Morgul wound that nearly destroyed Frodo. As Herald of Gil-galad, he stood with the High King at the siege of Barad-dûr and witnessed Sauron's defeat, being one of only 2 survivors who entered Mount Doom with Isildur. His lore mastery encompassed languages both living and dead, histories forgotten by others, and understanding of the music of creation that gave him insight into the patterns of fate. The Council of Elrond demonstrated his ability to guide disparate peoples toward common purpose, using wisdom rather than force to unite representatives of all free races. His foresight, inherited from his ancestor Melian the Maiar, allowed him to perceive possible futures and guide others along paths that led to hope rather than despair. During the Third Age, he commanded respect from all, including wizards, kings, and even the Ents, who recognized him as one of the few who remembered the Elder Days as they did. The power he wielded through Vilya was subtle but profound, maintaining the last homely house as a center of resistance against Sauron for thousands of years without ever raising a sword. His choice to remain as elfkind rather than choosing mortality like his brother Elros meant he carried the burden of watching ages pass and loved ones fade, granting him understanding of both loss and endurance that informed his counsel. Gandalf the White was the enhanced form of the Maiar Olorin after his resurrection by Ilúvatar himself, returning with power and authority that exceeded his previous Grey incarnation exponentially. As Olorin, he had dwelt with Nienna learning pity and patience, with Manwë gaining wisdom, and with Varda understanding light, making him uniquely prepared among the Istari for his mission. His resurrection came with removal of the limitations placed on the Istari, allowing him to access more of his true Maiar nature while remaining in physical form. He could now break Saruman's staff with a word, cast out possessing spirits like he did with Theoden, and command light that could pierce any darkness or deception. His confrontation with the Witch King at Minas Tirith showed him standing as the sole defender of the gate, his power alone preventing the Lord of the Nazgul from entering until the Rohirrim arrived. The flame of Ainur he wielded was not mere fire, but the secret fire of creation itself, the same power Ilúvatar used to give life to the world, making him a literal servant of the Creator's will. During the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, his presence alone could rally broken armies and restore hope to the desperate, his staff shining with light that strengthened good and weakened evil. He demonstrated ability to perceive events across vast distances, knowing of Frodo's progress despite hundreds of miles of separation, showing his consciousness operated beyond normal physical limitations. His true form, glimpsed briefly by Gimli and Fangorn, was described as a radiant being of white light wrapped in mortal flesh, revealing his angelic nature barely contained. Against the Balrog of Moria, he fought for 10 days straight from the depths of the earth to the peak of Xaroxagil, finally destroying a being of similar Maya origin through superior will and purpose. The enhancement of his power included authority over other Istari, as demonstrated when he expelled Saruman from the Order and broke his connection to their mission. His wisdom now encompassed not just knowledge but direct divine guidance, knowing exactly what must be done to achieve victory even when the path seemed impossible. The transformation from grey to white involved more than just increased power, as Gandalf's very essence was restructured by Ilúvatar to serve as a direct intervention in the affairs of Middle-earth. His memory of his time as Gandalf the Grey was initially fragmented, requiring conscious effort to recall his former name and relationships, showing the profound nature of his resurrection. The white robes he wore weren't merely symbolic, but were woven from light itself, providing protection against both physical and spiritual attacks that would have destroyed his previous form. His new staff was carved from a fragment of the Two Trees wood preserved in Valinor, making it a conduit for the ancient light that preceded the sun and moon. When he exorcised Saruman from Theoden, he didn't simply break an enchantment, but literally pulled Saruman's spirit through space, forcing a confrontation across hundreds of miles. His ability to call Shadowfax Lord of all Horses demonstrated dominion over the animal kingdom that exceeded even Radagast's connection to beasts. The prophecies he spoke weren't predictions but certainties, as his enhanced connection to Ilúvatar allowed him to see the threads of fate as they were woven. During his return to the Fellowship, the light that emanated from him was so intense that Legolas initially believed he was seeing a vision rather than a physical being. His confrontation with the mouth of Sauron showed his ability to pierce through lies and illusions instantly, seeing truth even when it was wrapped in layers of deception. The power he wielded at the Black Gate wasn't primarily martial but spiritual, his presence preventing the assembled forces of good from being overwhelmed by the despair that Sauron projected. His understanding of the ring's nature was complete, knowing not just its powers but the exact moment it would be destroyed, timing his actions to coincide with that predetermined instant. Radagast the Brown was one of the 5 Astari sent to Middle-earth, a Maya of Yavanna who retained his deep connection to nature and all living creatures. His power specialized in communion with animals and growing things, able to speak with birds, beasts, and even the trees themselves in their own languages. He could call upon the aid of any creature within miles of his presence, from the smallest insect to the great eagles, all of whom recognized him as a friend and protector. His home at Rhosgobel served as a sanctuary for injured and threatened animals, where he used forgotten arts of healing that could restore creatures others considered beyond help. The browns and greens of his robes were not merely color but represented his integration with the natural world, allowing him to move through forests undetected by any who meant harm to the wood. His staff carried the power of growth and renewal, able to accelerate plant growth, purify corrupted water, and restore balance to ecosystems damaged by evil. Unlike Gandalf, who walked among men and elves, Radagast found his purpose among the beasts and birds, learning secrets of the world that civilized folk had forgotten. His knowledge of herbs and natural remedies exceeded even Elrond's in certain areas, understanding properties of plants that grew in the deepest forests where others never ventured. During the Third Age, he maintained watch over Mirkwood, monitoring the growing shadow and sending reports through his bird friends to those who needed warning. His seeming failure in the eyes of some was actually dedication to a different aspect of the mission, preserving the natural world that others forgot in their focus on kingdoms and powers. The rabbit sled he fashioned demonstrated his unconventional methods were simply different approaches to the same fight against darkness, using nature's own systems rather than swords and spells. His greatest feat was maintaining networks of animal spies that covered thousands of square miles, providing intelligence that even Saruman's Palantir could not match. The corruption of Saruman pained him deeply, as they had been brothers in purpose, but Radagast remained true to his mission while the White fell to pride and power. Beorn was the last known skin changer in Middle-earth, possessing the unique ability to transform between man and giant bear at will, a power that predated the rings and wizardry. In his man form, he stood taller and broader than any normal human, with strength enough to lift ponies with one hand and snap iron chains like thread. As a bear, he grew to tremendous size, larger than any natural bear, with claws that could tear through armor, and jaws that could crush helmets with the heads still inside them. His origin remained mysterious even to himself, possibly descended from the first men or perhaps something older, connected to the ancient days when such transformations were less rare. During the Battle of Five Armies, he arrived in bear form at the climax, scattering bodyguards of bolg-like leaves and crushing the goblin leader himself, turning the tide of battle single-handedly. His senses in both forms exceeded normal limitations, able to smell orc pack movements from miles away and hear conversations that others would consider impossible distances. The protection he offered at his house was absolute, as no evil creature dared approach his lands, knowing that the bear man's wrath was death without exception or mercy. He commanded the loyalty of animals throughout the Anduin Valley, with horses, dogs, and even wild creatures serving him voluntarily out of respect rather than fear. His knowledge of the northern lands exceeded that of maps or scouts, knowing every path, stream, and hidden valley from the Misty Mountains to Mirkwood's western edges. The mead he brewed had properties beyond normal drink, granting exceptional vitality and clear thinking to those who consumed it, suggesting his abilities extended to herb lore and subtle magics. His house itself seemed to respond to his will, with animals performing complex tasks without verbal commands, maintaining gardens and preparing meals through some communion beyond speech. In battle rage as a bear, he became unstoppable, shrugging off arrow wounds that would fell a normal beast and fighting with intelligence that made him deadlier than any animal. Despite his power, he lived simply, refusing kingship or leadership beyond his own lands, content to guard the passages between mountain and forest. His descendants, the Boromings, inherited some measure of his abilities, though none matched the original skin changer's full power of transformation. Durin the Deathless was the eldest and greatest of the seven fathers of the dwarves, created directly by Alblay the Smith before the awakening of the elves, making him older than any other speaking being save the Ents. He alone among the fathers awoke without companion at Mount Gundabad, gazing into Cael Zaram, where he saw a crown of stars reflected above his head, marking his divine destiny. His life spanned so many ages that other races believed him immortal, giving rise to his title Deathless, though he eventually passed like all mortal beings must. The wisdom and craft he possessed came directly from Als's teaching in the timeless period before his sleep, giving him knowledge of metal and stone that exceeded even later dwarf smiths. He founded Khazad-dûm, the greatest of all dwarf cities, discovering the mithril veins that would make it the wonder of the northern world for thousands of years. His mere presence could inspire dwarfs to feats of craftsmanship they could never achieve again, as if his spirit carried some remnant of Alsa's own creative power. The Durin's folk believed he would return 7 times, reborn as his own descendant with full memories of his past lives, making him functionally immortal through reincarnation. Each return of Durin brought a golden age to the dwarves, with crafts and victories that exceeded the generations between his appearances. The doors, halls, and deepest chambers of Khazad-dûm bore his personal touch, with engineering so perfect that they operated flawlessly for millennia without maintenance. His understanding of the music of creation, learned from Alla who participated in it, allowed him to craft items that harmonized with the fundamental forces of Arda. The throne of Khazad-dûm was carved by his own hands from a single block of black stone, with properties that allowed it to endure any catastrophe that might befall the mountain. His crown, the first crown of the dwarves, contained powers of kingship that legitimized rule, and only those of his direct line could wear it without consequence. The 7 rings given to the dwarf lords were distributed according to patterns he established, showing his influence extended beyond death to shape future events. Even the Balrog that eventually destroyed Khazad-dûm avoided the deepest halls Durin had personally consecrated, showing that his power left permanent marks on the stone itself. His axe, passed down through generations, never dulled and always struck true, carrying something of his will within the metal that all Lee had helped forge. The wisdom he encoded in the first Khazad runes contained layers of meaning that later dwarves could study for centuries without exhausting their secrets. During his first life, Durin walked Middle-earth for so long that he witnessed the rising and setting of countless mortal kingdoms, learning their crafts and teaching them stonework in return. The great roads that connected the dwarf cities were laid according to his design, following lines of power in the earth that only he could perceive, making travel between the kingdoms swifter and safer than any surface road. His relationship with the Ents predated any other alliance between speaking peoples, as both races remembered the world before the sun and moon, giving them a unique understanding of time's passage. The wealth he accumulated wasn't merely gold and gems, but knowledge of every vein and deposit in the northern mountains, information he encoded in maps that could only be read by those who knew the secret keys of interpretation. When dragons first appeared in the world, Durin was among the few who understood their nature, having learned from Olli about the corruption Morgoth would bring to Arda's creatures. His forges developed the first weapons specifically designed to pierce dragon scale, techniques that would be refined but never truly surpassed by later smiths.